The pregnancy test trembled in my hands, 2 pink lines mocking me with their cheerful hue. I should have been overjoyed, but all I felt was dread. How could I bring a child into this mess? Emily? Jane's voice floated up the stairs. Are you all right in there? I quickly wrapped the test in toilet paper and shoved it deep into the trash can. I'm fine, I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. Just a bit of morning sickness. Jane, my sister-in-law and unexpected roommate, was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, her brow furrowed with concern. You look pale. Maybe you should see a doctor? It's nothing, I insisted, forcing a smile. Probably just something I ate. Jane's eyes narrowed, but she didn't push. That was one of the things I appreciated about her. She knew when to back off. Unlike her brother, my estranged husband Richard, who couldn't take a hint if it slapped him in the face. Well, if you're sure, Jane said, heading towards the kitchen. I made some ginger tea, if you'd like. It might help settle your stomach. I followed her, grateful for the distraction. Thanks, Jane. I don't know what I'd do without you. She turned, a sad smile on her face. That's what family's for, right? We stick together, no matter what. If only she knew how those words would come back to haunt us both. As I sipped the tea, my phone buzzed. Richard's name flashed on the screen, and I felt my stomach clench. I declined the call, earning a questioning look from Jane. He's been calling a lot lately, she said, her tone carefully neutral. I set the mug down with more force than necessary. He can keep calling. I'm not ready to talk to him. Jane nodded, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt? Worry? Before I could analyze it further, she changed the subject. I was thinking of heading to the farmer's market later. Want to come? The thought of facing crowds made my head spin. I think I'll pass, but could you pick up some of those strawberries I like? Of course, Jane said, grabbing her purse. Anything else? I shook my head, and she headed out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the secret growing inside me. As soon as the door closed, I slumped against the kitchen counter. How had my life become such a disaster? 6 months ago, I'd been happily married, planning for our future. Now, I was living with my sister-in-law, pregnant and alone. I wandered into the guest room, my room now, and collapsed on the bed. My hand drifted to my still flat stomach. How was I going to tell Richard? Should I even tell him at all? A soft ping from my laptop caught my attention. I'd left my email open, and a new message had arrived. From Richard. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. Please talk to me. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I miss you. I love you. Come home. Tears pricked at my eyes. Part of me wanted to believe him, to run back into his arms and pretend nothing had happened. But I couldn't forget the lipstick on his collar, the late nights at the office, the way he'd pull away when I tried to touch him. I was about to close the laptop when something caught my eye. A folder I didn't recognize, tucked away in a corner of the desktop. Jane's recipes, it said. Odd. Jane wasn't much of a cook. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the folder, expecting to find a collection of Pinterest links or scanned index cards. Instead, I found myself staring at a series of emails. Emails between Jane and Richard. Emails full of pet names and inside jokes. Emails detailing secret meetups and passionate encounters. My vision blurred as I read message after message, each one driving the knife deeper into my heart. The dates stretched back months, long before Richard and I had separated. The front door opened, and I heard Jane's cheerful voice. Emily, I'm back. I got those strawberries you wanted. I slammed the laptop shut, my mind reeling. How could they do this to me? How long had this been going on? As Jane's footsteps approached, I made a split-second decision. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan. Because one thing was crystal clear. Jane wasn't the supportive sister-in-law I thought she was. And I was done being the victim in this story. It was time for Emily to fight back. I spent the night tossing and turning, the weight of Jane's betrayal crushing my chest. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't live under the same roof as that snake for another day. As I stumbled into the kitchen, Jane was already there, humming as she poured coffee. Morning, Em. How are you feeling today? The cheerful facade made my blood boil. I slammed my mug on the counter, making her jump. Cut the act, Jane. I know everything. Her smile faltered. What are you taltered? What are you talking about? I saw the emails, I spat. Between you and Richard, how long has it been going on? Months? Years? The color drained from Jane's face. Emily, I can explain. Save it, I snarled. I trusted you. You were supposed to be my family. Jane reached for me, her eyes brimming with tears. We never meant to hurt you. It just happened. I jerked away from her touch. Get out now. But Emily, where will I go? I laughed bitterly. I don't care. Go to Richard. You two deserve each other. As Jane scrambled to pack her things, I retreated to my room, shaking with rage and grief. I needed someone on my side, someone I could trust. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Abby, it's Em. I need you. An hour later, I was sitting in Abigail's cozy living room, spilling out the whole sordid tale. My oldest friend listened, her face a mix of shock and fury. Those lying, cheating bastards, Abby growled when I finished. Em, I'm so sorry. I wiped away tears I hadn't realized were falling. I don't know what to do, Abby. I'm pregnant, alone, and I've lost everything. Abby's eyes hardened with determination. No, you haven't. You've still got me, and we're going to make those two pay for what they've done. I blinked, surprised by the venom in her voice. What do you mean? A slow, wicked smile spread across Abby's face. I mean, it's time for a little revenge, honey. They think they can walk all over you? Let's show them how wrong they are. Part of me recoiled at the idea. I'd never been the type for revenge. But another part, a darker part I barely recognized, thrilled at the thought of making Richard and Jane suffer like I had. What did you have in mind? I asked, leaning forward. Abby's grin widened. First things first, we need to gather evidence. Those emails are a good start, but we need more. Phone records, credit card statements, anything that proves their affair. I nodded, my mind racing. Richard's always been careless with his phone. I bet I could get into it if I had the chance. Perfect, Abby said, and Jane's bound to slip up eventually. We just need to be patient and watch for our moment. As Abby outlined her plan, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. This wasn't like me. I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who avoided conflict. But the thought of Richard and Jane getting away with their betrayal made my blood boil. What about the baby? I asked, my hand instinctively going to my stomach. I don't want to drag my child into this mess. Abby's expression softened. We'll protect the little one, Em. But think about it. Don't you want your baby to have a mother who stands up for herself, who doesn't let people walk all over her? I hesitated, torn between my desire for justice and my fear of the unknown. I don't know, Abby. This all feels so wrong. What's wrong is what they did to you, Abby insisted. You're not the bad guy here, Em. You're just fighting back. As I left Abby's house that evening, my head was spinning with possibilities. Part of me was terrified of what we were planning, but another part, a part that grew stronger with each passing minute, was ready for war. I unlocked my phone, my finger hovering over Richard's number. It was time to set the wheels in motion. Richard? I said when he answered, forcing a tremor into my voice. Can we talk? I think I'm ready to work things out. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in a store window. The woman staring back at me looked different, harder, more determined. Emily the doormat was gone. Emily the Avenger had taken her place. And Richard and Jane wouldn't know what hit them. The next few weeks were a blur of secret meetings and clandestine phone calls. I played my part perfectly, convincing Richard and Jane that I was oblivious to their betrayal. Meanwhile, I was gathering evidence like a woman possessed. You're doing great, Em, Abby whispered as we huddled over my laptop, reviewing the latest batch of incriminating emails I'd managed to forward from Richard's account. They don't suspect a thing. I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and guilt. I never thought I'd be good at deception. Abby squeezed my hand. It's not deception. It's survival. Remember that. The weight of my growing belly reminded me of the stakes. This wasn't just about me anymore. One afternoon, I overheard Richard on the phone with Jane. My heart raced as I fumbled to set up the recording app Abby had installed on my phone. Can't keep this up forever, Richard was saying. Emily's bound to find out eventually. Jane's voice crackled through the speaker. So what if she does? She's got nowhere else to go. She needs us. I bit back a bitter laugh. If only they knew. The conversation continued, revealing details of their affair and their plans for the future, plans that didn't include me or my baby. By the time Richard hung up, my hands were shaking with rage and triumph. I had them. The next day, I met with Sarah Goldstein, the cutthroat divorce attorney Abby had recommended. Well, Mrs. Harrison, Sarah said, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, I'd say you have a very strong case here. Infidelity, emotional abuse, potential alienation of affection. We can make things very uncomfortable for your husband. I leaned forward, my voice steady. And custody. What about my baby? Sarah's eyes softened slightly. Given the circumstances, I don't foresee any issues with you obtaining primary custody. We'll make sure your child is protected. As I left Sarah's office, a wave of nausea hit me. Morning sickness, or the weight of what I was about to do. I stumbled to a nearby bench, trying to catch my breath. Emily? A familiar voice made me freeze. I looked up to see Jane approaching, her face a mask of concern. Are you all right? What are you doing in this part of town? I forced a smile, my mind racing. Oh, just a checkup with my new OBGYN. The office moved recently. Jane's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained syrupy sweet. You should have told me. I would have come with you. You know how worried Richard and I have been about you and the baby. The mention of Richard's name in the same breath as my child made my stomach churn. I stood up, perhaps too quickly. I'm fine, Jane. Really, I should get going. As I turned to leave, Jane caught my arm. Wait, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. About Richard and me. For a moment, I thought she was going to confess. My heart pounded as I waited for the admission, the apology, anything that might make this easier. But Jane just smiled, her grip on my arm tightening slightly. We're so glad you're giving him another chance. Family is everything, right? I nodded mechanically, unable to trust my voice. As Jane prattled on about dinner plans and nursery colors, a cold realization settled over me. She wasn't going to confess. They were going to keep lying, keep pretending, keep using me until I had nothing left to give. In that moment, any lingering doubts I had about my plan vanished. I thought of the evidence safely stored away, of Sarah Goldstein's confident smile, of Abby's unwavering support. You're right, Jane, I said, my voice steady. Family is everything, and I'm going to make sure mine is protected no matter what. Jane's smile faltered for a moment as if she sensed the shift in the air. But before she could respond, I was already walking away, my steps purposeful and my resolve ironclad. The time for gathering evidence was over. Now it was time to act. The pain hit me like a freight train, doubling me over as I clutched my swollen belly. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when I was so close. Emily! Jane's voice, thick with concern, cut through the haze of agony. Oh my God, we need to get you to the hospital. I wanted to refuse, to push her away, but another wave of pain left me gasping. Before I knew it, I was in Jane's car, speeding towards the emergency room. The next few hours were a blur of doctors, nurses, and machines. False labor, they said. The baby was fine, but I needed to stay overnight for observation. As I lay in the sterile hospital bed, exhaustion and relief warred within me. Jane never left my side, playing the role of concerned sister-in-law to perfection. I've called Richard, she said, squeezing my hand. He's on his way. I nodded, too tired to maintain my facade of ignorance. As the pain medication kicked in, I felt my eyelids growing heavy. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the room was dark. Jane was still there, but something had changed. The mask of concern had slipped, revealing a cold, calculating expression I'd never seen before. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. Just a false alarm. No, she doesn't suspect anything. We're still in the clear. My heart raced as I realized she was talking to Richard. I kept my eyes nearly closed, feigning sleep as I strained to hear more. I know, Jane continued, irritation creeping into her voice. But we can't rush this. Emily trusts me completely. If we play our cards right, we can get everything. The house, the money, even custody of the baby. The words hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting to take everything from me, including my child. Don't worry, Jane said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I'll make sure Emily never finds out. As far as she knows, I'm her rock, her only support. She'll never see it coming. As Jane ended the call, I fought to keep my breathing steady, my mind reeling. How could I have been so naive? I'd known about the affair, but this was beyond betrayal. Oh, you're awake, Jane said, her concerned mask back in place as she noticed my open eyes. How are you feeling, sweetie? I forced a weak smile. Better, thanks. Has Richard arrived yet? Jane's eyes flickered with something. Annoyance? Fear? Before she smoothed her features. Not yet, but he's on his way. Don't worry. I'm here for you. The irony of her words made me want to scream, but I swallowed it down. You're so good to me, Jane. I don't know what I'd do without you. She patted my hand, and it took every ounce of self-control not to recoil from her touch. That's what family is for, right? As Jane turned away to adjust my pillows, I caught sight of my phone on the bedside table. I needed to warn Abby, to tell her what I'd overheard. But how could I do it with Jane hovering over me? Just then, a nurse entered the room. Mrs. Harrison, we need to run a few more tests. I'm afraid I'll have to ask your sister-in-law to step out for a bit. Jane hesitated, but the nurse was insistent. As soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. Abby, I whispered urgently into the voicemail. It's worse than we thought. They're not just having an affair. They're planning to take everything, including the baby. We need to move fast. Call me as soon as you get this. As I ended the call, a strange calm settled over me. The time for hesitation was over. Jane and Richard had shown their true colors, and now I knew exactly what I was up against. My baby kicked, as if sensing my resolve. I placed a protective hand over my belly, a fierce determination burning in my chest. Don't worry, little one, I murmured. Mommy's going to fix this, and heaven help anyone who tries to stand in our way. The day I decided to confront Richard dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in my head, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. I found him in his study, hunched over his laptop. He looked up as I entered, surprise flitting across his face. Emily, what are you doing here? We need to talk, Richard, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. About us, about Jane. The color drained from his face. What about Jane? I took a deep breath, steeling myself. I know about the affair. I know about your plans to take everything from me, including our baby. Richard's shock quickly morphed into anger. He stood up, towering over me. You've been spying on me? On us? I didn't have to, I shot back. You two weren't exactly subtle. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room like a caged animal. You don't understand, Emily. Things haven't been right between us for a long time. Jane, she gets me in a way you never did. The audacity of his words stung, but I held my ground. So that justifies betraying me? Planning to take our child? Richard's eyes narrowed. Oh, please. You pushed me into Jane's arms with your constant nagging, your neediness. This is as much your fault as it is mine. I felt as if I'd been slapped. My fault? I trusted you. I loved you. Love? Richard scoffed. You don't know the first thing about love. You're suffocating, Emily. Always have been. Jane, she lets me breathe. Each word was a dagger to my heart, but I refused to let him see me cry. And what about our baby? Were you really going to try to take custody? For a moment, something like guilt flashed in Richard's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by cold determination. I'd be a better parent than you. You're too emotional, too unstable. The baby would be better off with me and Jane. The room spun around me as the full weight of his betrayal hit home. This man, who I'd loved and trusted, was willing to destroy me completely. You're wrong, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. About everything, and I'm going to prove it. Richard laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. How? You've got nothing, Emily. No money, no job, nowhere to go. Face it, you need me. In that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear and hurt I'd been carrying for months transformed into a white-hot rage, but instead of lashing out, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. I looked Richard straight in the eye, my voice steady. You're right, I do need you. Confusion replaced the smugness on his face. What? I forced my lips into a trembling smile, channeling every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I can't do this alone, Richard. I'm scared. Can we try to work things out? For the baby's sake? Richard's expression softened, a triumphant gleam in his eye. He thought he'd won. Oh, Emily, of course we can. I knew you'd come around eventually. As he pulled me into an embrace, I fought the urge to recoil. Over his shoulder, I caught sight of a framed photo on his desk. Richard and Jane, laughing together at some party. My resolve hardened. Thank you, I whispered, my mind already racing with plans. You're right, family is everything. We need to stick together. As I left Richard's study, my hand instinctively went to my belly. Don't worry, little one, I murmured. Mommy's got this under control. I pulled out my phone, sending a quick text to Abby. It's done. He bought it. Time for phase 2. The game was on, and this time I was playing to win. Richard and Jane thought they had me cornered, but they were about to learn that a mother protecting her child was the most dangerous opponent of all. Let them think they'd won. I'd show them just how wrong they were. The weeks following my confrontation with Richard were a whirlwind of secret preparations and careful deceptions. On the surface, I played the role of the forgiving wife, smiling sweetly at Richard and Jane while my insides churned with disgust. "You're doing great, Em," Abby whispered during one of our clandestine meetings. "They don't suspect a thing." I nodded, my hand resting on my ever-growing belly. I just hope it's enough. With Abby's help and Sarah Goldstein's legal guidance, I began piecing together my new life. We found a modest apartment across town, far from Richard's reach. I started transferring small amounts of money from our joint account to a new one in my name only, careful not to raise any red flags. One afternoon, while Richard was at work and Jane was out shopping, I snuck into Richard's home office. My heart pounded as I copied financial documents and downloaded emails from his computer. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of their betrayal. As my due date approached, the pressure intensified. Richard and Jane grew more affectionate, more solicitous. Their saccharine concern made me want to scream, but I held it together, knowing the end was in sight. "We should start thinking about names," Richard said one evening, his hand on my stomach. It took every ounce of willpower not to flinch away. "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "I was thinking maybe Sarah for a girl." Jane, lounging nearby, perked up. "Oh, that's lovely. Sarah Harrison has a nice ring to it." I bit back a bitter laugh. If only they knew. The next day, I met with Sarah Goldstein to finalize our strategy. "Everything's in order," she assured me, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We've got them dead to rights, Emily. They won't know what hit them." As I left her office, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I steadied myself against a wall, taking deep breaths. The stress was taking its toll, but I couldn't falter now, not when I was so close. That night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep, I overheard Richard on the phone with Jane. "It's almost time," he whispered. "Once the baby's born, we'll make our move. Emily won't know what hit her." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. They thought they had me cornered, but they were in for a rude awakening. The next morning, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. I called my boss, spinning a tale about needing extended leave due to pregnancy complications. In reality, I'd already secured a new job starting in a month, thanks to Abby's connections. As I packed a small bag with essentials, hiding it in the trunk of my car, a sudden pain gripped my abdomen. I gasped, clutching my belly. No, not now. It was too soon. Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Panic rose in my throat. This wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't ready. With shaking hands, I dialed Abby's number. "It's happening," I choked out. "The baby's coming." "Stay calm," Abby said, her voice steady. "I'm on my way. We can do this, Em. Just hold on." As I ended the call, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked terrified, but there was a steely determination in her eyes that I barely recognized. "We can do this," I whispered to my reflection, to my unborn child. "We're stronger than they think." Another contraction ripped through me, and I gritted my teeth against the pain. Time was up. Ready or not, my new life was about to begin. And Richard and Jane? They were about to learn that they'd underestimated me for the last time. The contractions were coming faster now, each one a reminder that time was running out. Abby burst through the door, her face a mix of panic and determination. "We need to go, Em, now." I nodded, gritting my teeth against another wave of pain. "The bag? In the car." As Abby helped me to her car, I caught sight of Jane's SUV turning onto our street. My heart raced. We were cutting it too close. "Drive," I gasped as Abby started the engine. "Don't stop for anything." We peeled away, just as Jane pulled into the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw her confused face, phone already in hand. No doubt calling Richard. Between contractions, I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the pre-written message I'd prepared for this moment. With trembling fingers, I hit send. To Richard, "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know everything. The affair, your plans for our baby, it's over. Divorce papers are on the kitchen table. Don't try to find me." I switched off my phone, tossing it into my bag. There was no going back now. "Hospital?" Abby asked, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I shook my head. No, the new apartment. Sarah's meeting us there. Abby's eyes widened. Em, are you sure? What if something goes wrong? Another contraction hit, and I clutched my belly. Nothing's going wrong. This baby and I, we're fighters. The next hour was a blur of pain and determination. We made it to the apartment where Sarah Goldstein was waiting with a midwife she'd arranged. As they helped me inside, I caught sight of my phone, lit up with missed calls and messages. I ignored it. Emily, Sarah said, her voice steady, I filed the papers. As of an hour ago, you're legally separated. Richard can't touch you or the baby without going through me. Relief washed over me, quickly replaced by another contraction. I screamed, the sound echoing off the bare walls of my new home. Hours passed in a haze of pain and pushing. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, a new sound filled the room, the strong, healthy cry of my daughter. She's beautiful, Em, Abby whispered, tears in her eyes as she placed the tiny bundle in my arms. I looked down at my daughter's face, overcome with a love so fierce it took my breath away. Hello, Sarah, I murmured. Welcome to the world. As if on cue, a commotion erupted outside. Richard's voice, angry and desperate, carried through the door. Emily, I know you're in there. You can't do this. Sarah moved to the door, her voice cold and professional. Mr. Harrison, you're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll call the police. That's my child, Richard shouted. You can't keep me from my child. I held Sarah closer, my heart pounding. We'd known this moment would come, but the reality was terrifying. Emily, please, Richard's voice cracked. We can work this out. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. For a moment, I wavered. The pain in his voice tugged at something deep inside me. But then I looked down at Sarah, so small and vulnerable, and my resolve hardened. Tell him to leave, I said to Sarah Goldstein, my voice stronger than I felt. Tell him I'll contact him when I'm ready, not before. As Richard's pleas faded, replaced by the sound of police sirens, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined bringing my child into the world, but it was the hand we'd been dealt. It's okay, little one, I whispered to Sarah. Mommy's got you, and I promise no one will ever hurt us again. As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion set in, but even as my eyes grew heavy, I knew one thing for certain. The hardest part was over. From here on out, Sarah and I would face the world together, on our own terms. And Richard? He was about to learn that he'd underestimated me for the last time. 6 months after Sarah's birth, I stood in front of the courthouse, my heart pounding. Today was the final hearing for my divorce and custody case. Richard had fought tooth and nail, but thanks to Sarah Goldstein's expert handling and the mountain of evidence I'd gathered, we were confident. Ready? Abby asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, adjusting Sarah in her carrier. As I'll ever be. Inside, Richard and Jane sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. Richard looked haggard, his once immaculate suit rumpled. Jane avoided my gaze, her face a mask of guilt and defiance. As the judge entered, I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would define our future. The proceedings flew by, in a blur of legal jargon and emotional testimony. Richard pleaded for joint custody, claiming he'd changed, that he deserved a chance to be a father. But when presented with the evidence of his affair and his plans to take Sarah away from me, his arguments crumbled. Finally, the judge cleared her throat. In light of the evidence presented, I hereby grant full custody of Sarah Harrison to Emily Harrison, with Richard Harrison granted supervised visitation rights. Relief washed over me, so intense I nearly collapsed. We'd done it. Sarah was safe. As we left the courthouse, Richard approached, his eyes red-rimmed. Emily, please, can we talk? Part of me wanted to ignore him, to walk away and never look back. But as I looked down at Sarah, peacefully sleeping in her carrier, I realized something. She deserved to know her father, even if he'd made terrible mistakes. You can see her, I said, my voice steady, but only under supervision, and only if you agree to counseling. Richard's face crumpled with relief and gratitude. Thank you, Emily. I promise. I'll do better. As he walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Back at my new apartment, I was surprised to find my neighbor Sarah waiting with a homemade casserole. Over the past months, she'd become a dear friend, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. I thought you might need this after today, she said, her smile warm. As we sat talking over dinner, Sarah suddenly grew serious. Emily, there's something I need to tell you. I'm not just a neighbor. I'm actually a family mediator and therapist. I blinked, surprised. Why didn't you say anything before? Sarah shrugged. I wanted to be your friend first, but now I think I might be able to help. If you're interested, I could mediate between you and Richard, help you both learn to co-parent effectively. I considered her offer, thinking of Richard's broken expression at the courthouse. I think I'd like that, for Sarah's sake. As Sarah left that evening, I stood by the window, watching the sunset. So much had changed in a year. I'd lost a husband, gained a daughter, and discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I looked down at Sarah, sleeping peacefully in her crib. We did it, little one, I whispered. It's just you and me now, but we've got this. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Co-parenting with Richard, building a new career, raising Sarah on my own, each day would bring new challenges. But for the first time in months, I felt truly hopeful. I was Emily Harrison, single mother, survivor, and fighter. And I was ready for whatever life threw my way next. As I crawled into bed that night, I smiled to myself. The Emily who had started this journey, scared, betrayed, and unsure, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced her worst fears and come out stronger. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new joys, new sorrows, but I was ready for them all, because now I knew the truth. I was capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined, and with Sarah by my side, there was nothing we couldn't face together. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. I barely noticed the splash of bubbly on my new dress as I stared at Brad, my husband of 1 month, in disbelief. What did you just say? I managed to choke out, praying I'd misheard him. Brad's blue eyes, once so captivating, now seemed cold and distant. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair and repeated the words that had just shattered my world. I'm in love with someone else. Aubrey, I want a divorce. The elegant anniversary dinner I'd spent hours preparing lay forgotten on the table behind us. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls of our penthouse apartment. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a cruel joke. Who is she? I demanded, my voice trembling. Brad hesitated, then squared his shoulders. Isabel Hartley. The name hit me like a physical blow. Isabel Hartley, the socialite whose face graced every society page and charity gala in the city. I'd always known Brad had a wandering eye, but this... How long? I whispered. 6 months, Brad admitted. I'm sorry, Aubrey, I never meant for this to happen. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. Never meant for it to happen? We've been married for 4 weeks, Brad. Did you even mean those vows? He had the decency to look ashamed. I thought I could make it work with us. I really did try. Try? I spat. By sleeping with another woman behind my back? Brad's expression hardened. Look, I know this is a shock, but let's be adults about this. We can handle the divorce quietly. No need for a big scene. I gaped at him, fury rising to replace the initial shock. A big scene? You drop this bomb on our anniversary and expect me to just roll over? Come on, Aubrey, Brad said, his tone patronizing. You had to know deep down that this wasn't working. We've been drifting apart for years. Because you've been cheating on me, I shouted, finally losing my composure. God, how many times have I forgiven you? And now this. Brad's phone chimed. He glanced at it, then back at me. I have to go. We can discuss the details later when you've calmed down. As he moved towards the door, something inside me snapped. I grabbed the nearest object, a crystal vase, another wedding gift, and hurled it at the wall. It exploded in a shower of glass, making Brad jump. You want a divorce? I snarled. Fine, but don't think for a second I'm going to make this easy for you. I've stood by you for 10 years, Brad. I've forgiven every indiscretion, supported your career, been the perfect wife. No more. Brad's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, he looked uncertain. What are you saying? I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze with steel in my own. I'm saying that if you want out of this marriage, it's going to cost you. Big time. Now, Aubrey, let's not be hasty. Get out, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Get out before I do something we'll both regret. Brad hesitated for a moment, then nodded curtly. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, heedless of the broken glass. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back furiously. No more crying over Brad Thompson. No more being the understanding, forgiving wife. As I sat there surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage, a new resolve began to form. Brad wanted a divorce? Fine. But he was about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. It was time to call a lawyer. I stared at the divorce papers spread across my kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of wine within easy reach. It had been 3 days since Brad's bombshell, and the shock was finally wearing off, replaced by a simmering anger that threatened to boil over at any moment. My phone buzzed. Another message from my best friend Lydia. "How are you holding up, sweetie? Need me to come over?" I sighed, typing out a quick reply. "I'm fine. Just going over everything with the lawyer tomorrow. Talk soon." The truth was, I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want their pity or their well-meaning advice. What I wanted was justice. As I poured another glass of wine, memories of the past decade flooded back. The first time I caught Brad cheating, just 2 years into our relationship. His tearful apologies, promises to change, and like a fool, I believed him. Then there was the work trip to Vegas that turned out to be a weekend with his secretary. The flirtatious texts I found on his phone from countless women. Each time I forgave him. Each time I thought things would be different. "Never again," I muttered, taking a long swig of wine. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my bitter reverie. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to answer. I wish I hadn't. Brad stood in the hallway, looking annoyingly handsome in an expensive suit. "Aubrey," he said, his voice soft. "Can we talk?" Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door in his face. Instead, I stepped aside, letting him in. "Nice suit," I said coldly. "Isabel's taste, I assume?" Brad winced. "Look, I know you're angry." "Angry doesn't begin to cover it," I snapped. "What do you want, Brad?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I once found endearing. Now it just irritated me. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the alimony." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I'm willing to be generous," he said, pulling out a folded document. "I had my lawyer draw this up. It's a fair settlement, Aubrey. More than fair, actually." I snatched the paper from his hand, scanning the numbers. My eyes widened. It was indeed generous, far more than I'd expected. "Why?" I demanded, suspicion creeping in. "What's the catch?" Brad sighed. "No catch. I want to make this right, or as right as it can be, given the circumstances." For a moment, I almost believed him, almost fell for the sincere look in his eyes, the regretful tone in his voice. But then I remembered all the times I'd heard this before. "Make it right?" I laughed bitterly. "You can't make this right, Brad. You've humiliated me, betrayed me, and for what? Some socialite who'll probably toss you aside the moment someone richer comes along?" Brad's expression hardened. "That's not fair. Isabel and I—" "I don't want to hear it." I cut him off. "You know what? Keep your generous offer. I'll see you in court." I crumpled up the settlement offer and threw it at his chest. Brad's eyes widened in surprise. "Aubrey, don't be foolish," he warned. "This is more than you'd get in any court settlement. Think about your future." His condescending tone was the final straw. "My future?" I hissed. "My future was supposed to be with you, Brad. But you threw that away, so now I'm going to build a new future. One where I don't have to depend on your generosity or anyone else's." I yanked open the door. "Get out, and tell your lawyer to prepare for war." As the door slammed behind him, I leaned against it, heart pounding. Part of me screamed that I was making a mistake, that I should take the money and run. But a stronger part, a part I'd buried for far too long, whispered something else. It whispered of justice, of standing up for myself at last, of making Brad pay for every lie, every betrayal. I walked back to the kitchen, bypassing the wine glass for the bottle itself. Tomorrow, I'd call my lawyer. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. And this time, I wasn't backing down. I stood in the courthouse hallway, my heart pounding as I waited for my lawyer to emerge from the judge's chambers. The divorce proceedings had been a whirlwind, moving faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Brad's eagerness to settle had initially made me suspicious, but now I was beginning to understand why. The door opened and my lawyer Sarah strode out with a satisfied smile. "It's done, Aubrey. The judge approved the settlement." I blinked, stunned. "Just like that? What about the fight I was preparing for?" Sarah shrugged. "Sometimes we get lucky. Brad's lawyer pushed for a quick resolution, and the terms are more than fair. You're getting a very generous alimony package." As if summoned by his name, Brad appeared at the end of the hallway, Isabel clinging to his arm like an expensive accessory. My stomach churned at the sight of them together. "Congratulations, Aubrey," Brad said, his tone maddeningly cordial. "I hope this settlement helps you start fresh." I wanted to slap the smug look off his face. Instead, I forced a smile. "Oh, it will. Thank you for your generosity." Isabel's eyes narrowed. "Brad, darling, we'll be late for the charity gala. We should go." As they turned to leave, I couldn't resist one parting shot. "Enjoy the high life, Brad. I hope it's worth it." He paused, looking back at me with an unreadable expression. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But then Isabel tugged on his arm, and they were gone. I let out a shaky breath. "It's really over, isn't it?" Sarah squeezed my shoulder. "It is. And you came out on top, Aubrey. The alimony alone will set you up comfortably for years." But as we left the courthouse, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. Why had Brad given in so easily? What was he hiding? Weeks passed, and I tried to settle into my new life as a single woman. The alimony checks arrived like clockwork, each one a reminder of the life I'd left behind. I should have felt victorious, relieved. Instead, I felt empty. One rainy afternoon, as I scrolled mindlessly through social media, a headline caught my eye. "Tech mogul Brad Thompson and socialite wife make splash at Hampton's gala." The photo showed Brad and Isabel dressed to the nines, champagne flutes in hand. They looked sickeningly happy, surrounded by the glitterati of New York's elite. Anger bubbled up inside me. While I sat alone in my apartment, Brad was living it up with his new wife, spending the money he'd built his company with during our marriage. I was about to close the app when another headline made me freeze. "Thompson Tech stock soars after surprise merger announcement." My hands shaking, I clicked the link. Brad's company, the one he'd started with seed money from my family, had just merged with a major Silicon Valley firm. The deal was worth billions. Suddenly, Brad's eagerness to settle, his generous alimony, it all made sense. He'd known this merger was coming. He'd rushed the divorce through before the news broke, before the true value of his assets could be calculated. I'd been played. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. I felt sick, betrayed all over again. Not just by Brad, but by the system that was supposed to protect me, to ensure a fair division of our marital assets. As I sat there, surrounded by the trappings of my old life, a cold determination settled over me. Brad thought he'd won, that he'd outsmarted me one last time. But he'd underestimated me, again. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying over the keys as I composed an email to Sarah. It was time to reopen the case. Time to show Brad and the world that Aubrey Thompson wasn't going down without a fight. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice. And I was going to get mine, no matter what it took. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen, willing the words to come. The website for my fledgling interior design business sat half-finished, a digital representation of my stalled life. It had been 3 months since the divorce, and I was struggling to find my footing. The alimony checks from Brad sat untouched in my bank account. Using that money felt like admitting defeat, like letting him win all over again. But my savings were dwindling, and the rent on this apartment, our old apartment, was due soon. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Lydia, arms laden with takeout bags. "Intervention time," she announced, breezing past me into the kitchen. "You've been ghosting everyone for weeks. Enough is enough." I sighed, following her. "I'm fine, Lydia, just busy with the new business." She fixed me with a skeptical look. "Uh-huh. And how's that going?" I gestured helplessly at my laptop. "It's a work in progress." Lydia's expression softened. "Sweetie, you can't keep punishing yourself. What happened with Brad wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" I countered, the bitterness I'd been suppressing bubbling to the surface. I was the one who kept forgiving him, who believed his lies. And now look at me, hiding in this apartment while he's out there living his best life with Isabel. Lydia grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to meet her gaze. "Listen to me, Aubrey. You are not the villain in this story. You're the hero. It's time you started acting like it." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. I'd been wallowing in self-pity, letting Brad's betrayal define me. It was time to take control of my narrative. With newfound determination, I turned back to my laptop. "Help me finish this website," I said to Lydia. "It's time to launch this business for real." We worked through the night, fueled by takeout and determination. By dawn, Aubrey's Interiors was live, my portfolio of past projects proudly displayed for the world to see. As the sun rose, my phone pinged with a notification, my first client inquiry, then another and another. Lydia squealed, hugging me tight. "See? You've got this!" For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could do this after all. But life, as I was learning, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. A week later, as I was preparing for my first official client meeting, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my lawyer. "Aubrey, we have a problem," she said, her voice tense. "Brad's lawyers are contesting the divorce settlement. They're claiming you knew about the merger before signing and are accusing you of fraud." The room spun around me. "What? That's ridiculous. I had no idea." "I know," Sarah cut in, "but they're pushing hard. If they win, you could lose everything. The alimony, the apartment, all of it." I sank onto the couch, my mind reeling. Just when I thought I was moving forward, Brad found a way to drag me back into his web of lies. "What do we do?" I whispered. Sarah's voice was grim. "We fight. But Aubrey, I need to know. Is there anything at all that could support their claims? Any conversations with Brad about the company before the divorce?" I racked my brain, thinking back to those tumultuous weeks. Then, with a jolt, I remembered, the night Brad came over with the settlement offer. He'd mentioned something about his company, about the future. I'd been too angry to pay attention at the time, but now... "There might be," I admitted, my stomach churning. "But Sarah, I swear I didn't know about the merger." "I believe you," she said, "but a good lawyer could twist this. We need to be prepared for a tough battle." As I hung up the phone, I stared at my newly launched website. The dream I'd just begun to build was already under threat. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Brad destroy me again. If he wanted a fight, he'd get one. But this time, I'd be ready. I picked up my phone, dialing Lydia's number. "I need your help," I said when she answered. "It's time to dig up every bit of dirt we can find on Brad Thompson. No more playing nice." The game had changed, and I was determined to win. I never thought I'd find myself skulking outside a high-end restaurant, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Through the window, I could see Brad and Isabel laughing with a group of well-heeled socialites. The sight made my blood boil. "Are you sure about this?" Lydia whispered beside me. I nodded grimly. "We need dirt on Brad, and his new crowd is our best bet." We'd spent weeks digging into Brad's life, looking for anything to counter his fraud accusations. So far, we'd come up empty. But tonight, Brad was dining with Isabel's father, a notoriously shady businessman. If there was dirt to be found, it would be here. As the group exited the restaurant, Lydia and I ducked behind a parked car. Brad's voice carried in the night air. "Don't worry, Richard," he was saying to Isabel's father. "The SEC won't find anything. I've made sure of it." My heart raced. SEC? What had Brad gotten himself into? We trailed them to a nearby bar, slipping inside and finding a secluded booth. Brad and his group were at the bar, drinks flowing freely. As the night wore on, their voices grew louder, less guarded. "Another round," Brad called, his words slightly slurred, "to outsmarting the government and my ex-wife." Laughter erupted from the group. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to march over and confront him. "Easy," Lydia murmured, placing a hand on my arm. "We're here for information, remember?" I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. That's when I heard it. Brad, bragging about cooking the books for his recent merger. "It was easy," he boasted. "Those idiots at the SEC don't have a clue. And Aubrey? She signed away her rights without even realizing what she was giving up." The words hit me like a physical blow. Brad hadn't just cheated on me, he'd committed fraud and used our divorce to cover his tracks. Suddenly, Isabel's shrill voice cut through the din. "Brad, darling, isn't that your ex-wife?" I froze, realizing too late that in my shock I'd stood up from our booth. Brad's eyes met mine across the room, widening in recognition and then narrowing in anger. "Time to go," Lydia hissed, grabbing my arm. We bolted for the exit, but Brad was faster. He caught up to us on the sidewalk, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. "What the hell are you doing here, Aubrey?" he demanded. I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze. "Just having a drink, Brad." "Is that a crime?" "Don't play dumb," he snarled. "You were spying on me. What did you hear?" "Enough," I shot back. "Enough to know that you're not just a cheater but a criminal, too." Brad's face paled. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. "Listen carefully," he hissed. "You breathe a word of what you heard tonight to anyone, and I'll make sure you lose everything. The alimony, your precious little business, all of it. Do you understand me?" I should have been terrified. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. In that moment, I saw Brad for what he truly was: a bully, a coward, and a fraud. "No, Brad," I said quietly. "You listen. I'm not the same woman you married. I'm not afraid of you anymore. So go ahead, try to take everything from me. But remember this, I know your secrets now, and I'm not afraid to use them." I turned on my heel, leaving Brad sputtering on the sidewalk. As Lydia and I hurried away, my mind raced. I had the information I needed now, but using it came with enormous risk. If I exposed Brad's fraud, I could lose everything in the ensuing legal battle. But if I stayed silent, could I live with myself? As we reached my apartment, I made my decision. I turned to Lydia, my voice steady. "Call Sarah," I said. "It's time to fight fire with fire." The battle lines were drawn, and this time I was ready for war. I stared at the television in disbelief, my coffee slipping from my fingers and shattering on the floor. Brad's face filled the screen, his usual confident smirk replaced by a look of panic. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "Tech mogul Brad Thompson's company, Thompson Tech, is under investigation by the SEC for alleged fraud and insider trading." My phone erupted with notifications. Texts from Lydia, calls from Sarah, even messages from old mutual friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Everyone wanted to know, had I known? Was I involved? I ignored them all, my eyes glued to the screen as more details emerged. The merger that had made Brad millions was now unraveling, dragging down not just his company but several others connected to Isabel's family. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Sarah, looking grim. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "The SEC wants to question you about Brad's activities during your marriage." My stomach dropped. "But I didn't know anything." Sarah's expression was sympathetic but firm. "They don't know that, and given the timing of your divorce and the merger, they think I was in on it," I finished, feeling sick. As Sarah outlined our legal options, my mind raced. I thought of the night at the bar, of Brad's drunken boasts. I had evidence that could bury him, but using it meant admitting I'd been spying on him. It could make me look complicit. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Aubrey?" Isabel's voice, usually so haughty, now sounded desperate. "Please, you have to help us. He's not handling this well." I laughed bitterly. "And why should I care?" "Because," Isabel's voice broke, "he's threatening to implicate you. He says if he goes down, he's taking you with him." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I ended the call, turning to Sarah with wide eyes. "We have a problem." Hours later, I sat in a sleek conference room, facing a team of stern-faced SEC investigators. Sarah sat beside me, a reassuring presence as I recounted my marriage to Brad, the divorce, everything I knew about his business dealings. "Mrs. Thompson," one investigator leaned forward, "are you aware that your ex-husband claims you had full knowledge of the merger and its irregularities?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I am now, but it's not true. Brad kept me in the dark about his business dealings throughout our marriage." "Can you prove that?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I can, but I need assurances that I won't be implicated for how I obtained this information." The investigators exchanged glances. "Go on," I recounted the night at the bar, playing the audio recording I'd secretly made on my phone. Brad's drunken confessions filled the room, damning him with every word. As the recording ended, a heavy silence fell. The lead investigator nodded slowly. "This changes things. Mrs. Thompson, we'll need you to come in for a formal statement." I left the SEC offices feeling drained but oddly liberated. I'd taken a risk, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my own story. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this." I should have been scared. Instead, I felt a surge of determination. Brad had underestimated me for the last time. As I hailed a cab, my phone rang again. This time, it was my biggest client, calling to cancel our contract in light of the scandal. In the span of a day, I'd become toxic by association. I leaned back in the cab, closing my eyes. I'd done the right thing, but at what cost? My business, my reputation, my future, everything I'd worked so hard to rebuild was now hanging by a thread. But as the city lights blurred past the window, I made a silent vow. I'd survived Brad's betrayal once. I would survive this too. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head-on. Little did I know, the real battle was just beginning. The pounding on my door jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. My heart raced as I approached the door, peering through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. Brad stood there, disheveled and wild-eyed, a far cry from the polished executive I'd once known. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. "Aubrey, please," his voice cracked. "I know you're in there. I need your help." Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Brad stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and desperation. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, keeping my distance. Brad's eyes darted around the room. "It's all falling apart, Aubrey. The company, the merger, everything. Isabel left me. Her family's lawyers are circling like vultures." "And this concerns me how?" I crossed my arms, fighting to keep my voice steady. He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I'm sorry for everything. I was a fool, Aubrey. I threw away the best thing in my life for what? A life that was all smoke and mirrors." I'd imagined this moment so many times, Brad broken, apologizing, but now that it was happening, I felt nothing but a cold, hard anger. "You're only sorry because you got caught," I said flatly. "If your schemes had worked out, you'd still be living it up with Isabel, wouldn't you?" Brad's face crumpled. "No, that's not true. I've realized." "Save it," I cut him off. "What do you want, Brad? Why are you really here?" He took a deep breath. "I need your help. The SEC, they're building a case against me. But if you testify that you knew about the merger, that you were involved..." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to perjure myself, to go down with you?" "Please, Aubrey," he begged, reaching for my hand. I jerked away. "We were a team once. We could be again. I still love you." For a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, the man I'd forgiven time and time again. But then I remembered the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the humiliation of discovering his affairs, the way he'd discarded me for a younger model. "No," I said, my voice steel. "We're not a team, Brad. We haven't been for a long time. And you don't love me. You love what I represent. A way out of the mess you've made." Brad's face hardened. "You owe me, Aubrey, that alimony you've been living on. My money built your precious little business." I laughed bitterly. "Your money? You mean the money you defrauded from investors? The money you used to buy your way into Isabel's world?" "Be careful," Brad growled, taking a step towards me. "You don't want to make an enemy of me." Fear flashed through me, but I stood my ground. "No, Brad, you don't want to make an enemy of me. I have the recording, remember? One call to the SEC and..." Brad lunged at me, his eyes wild. I stumbled backwards, knocking over a lamp. The crash seemed to snap him out of it. He stared at his hands in horror. "Oh God, Aubrey, I'm sorry." "I didn't mean..." "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Get out now, or I'm calling the police." Brad's shoulders slumped in defeat. As he shuffled towards the door, he turned back one last time. "I really am sorry, Aubrey, for everything." The door closed behind him, and I sank to the floor, trembling. I'd stood my ground, but at what cost? Brad was desperate, unpredictable. What if he made good on his threats? My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "SEC wants to meet tomorrow. Urgent." I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. In a few hours, I'd have to face the investigators again. I'd have to decide once and for all, protect myself or tell the whole truth and risk everything. As dawn broke over the city, I made my choice. Whatever came next, I was done living in Brad's shadow. It was time to write my own story, no matter the consequences. I stood in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Months had passed since that night Brad showed up at my door, desperate and unhinged. In that time, my world had been turned upside down. The SEC investigation had been brutal. Every aspect of my life with Brad had been scrutinized, every financial decision questioned. I'd lost clients, friends, and more than a few nights' sleep. But I'd stood my ground, telling the truth even when it hurt. Now, as I waited for the judge's decision, I caught Brad's eye across the courtroom. He looked haggard, a shell of the man who'd once commanded boardrooms. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. Then I remembered all the pain he'd caused, and my resolve hardened. "In the matter of the United States versus Bradley Thompson," the judge began, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "This court finds the defendant guilty on all counts of fraud and insider trading." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. I closed my eyes, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. It was over. Finally, truly over. As the judge detailed Brad's sentence, years in prison, millions in fines, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I'd told the truth, consequences be damned, and justice had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. I pushed through them, ignoring the cameras and microphones thrust in my face. Lydia was waiting by the curb, a supportive smile on her face. "You did it, Aubrey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "It's over." But it wasn't over. Not really. As we drove away from the courthouse, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. I had to rebuild. My life, my business, my trust in myself. Months passed. Slowly, painstakingly, I pieced my world back together. My interior design business, nearly destroyed by the scandal, began to recover. Clients who'd abandoned me started to return, drawn by my newfound reputation for integrity. One day, as I was finishing up a consultation with a new client, I noticed a man lingering by my office door. He was handsome, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Can I help you?" I asked, curious. He stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm David. I hope this isn't too forward, but I've been following your story in the news. What you did, standing up to your ex-husband like that, it was incredibly brave." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "Thank you. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do." David's smile widened. "I was wondering if you might like to grab coffee sometime? To talk about interior design, of course," he added with a wink. For a moment, I hesitated. The wounds from Brad's betrayal were still fresh. But as I looked into David's eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine admiration and respect. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. As David and I walked out of my office, chatting easily, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same one who'd stood shell-shocked in her kitchen all those months ago, listening to her husband confess his affair. This woman was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand up for herself. She'd faced her worst fears and come out the other side, battered but unbroken. I thought of Brad, sitting in his prison cell, stripped of the wealth and status he'd valued above all else. I no longer felt anger or bitterness towards him. Instead, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude. His betrayal had forced me to confront my own strength, to rebuild my life on my terms. In trying to destroy me, he'd inadvertently set me free. As David held the door open for me, I stepped out into the sunlight, ready to embrace whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited to face it. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning.